Isn't it time that we have a national conversation as a country? The economy is tanking, taxes are rising, things are going down the tubes. All we can hear is all about political peccadillos and chicanery. It is time that we had a conversation in this country. It is time that we declutter and have a real conversation. And this is Siasa Bomba. I am Dibala Ine. Thank you for joining us on this installment of Siasa Bomba. My name is Dibala Ine and I'm really stoked today you've tuned in. A lot of stuff that we're going to talk about as far as food security is concerned. That is the theme that these episodes they've been running under. And today I'm really happy to be joined by Mr. Kidi Mwaga, who's the Secretary, Policy and Legal Affairs, KANU. And also we have a beautiful girl here. Her name is Kainyu Jerry. She is a regenerative farm and food system designer. Heard of it? Well, myself, I'm yet to learn, so I'll start with her. Jerry, food system designer, regenerative farming. You want to expound on that? First of all, karibu sana.
Asante.
Right? Karibu sana.
Asante.
Yeah, let's enjoy the conversation. Where we need to clear some definitions here before we proceed. Lest they just fly way over our heads.
Let's do that.
Please.
So what I do is, I'll give you a good example. You have your 2-acre farm, for instance, yeah? You call me and you want it to be a closed loop food system. So I come in and first of all, we're looking at permaculture, or how do we grow food there that, one, makes it so your plate is colorful. You have the variety that is required for a full diet. How do you make it so it's minimum waste, minimum labor? If you hope to grow some food for commerce, then how do we include that into the plan? So I come in, I look at, the way your land slopes, availability of water, what your goals are, what your family likes to eat, the context within which your farm exists, and then I design something for you and we plant it up.
Oh, wow. Why the flash of interest in this particular designing?
Because our farming systems right now are highly flawed. They're getting us into trouble. Monoculture just is not working anymore. We have the whole phenomenon of the malnourished farmer. That's a reality. So how do we do it in a way that, first of all, provides for the person growing the food, and then let's talk about the surplus for commerce. Malnutrition, it's going up. Obesity, it's going up. Hunger, we need to address this, and it needs to be from an ecosystems perspective. We can no longer just attempt to answer with these questions just from a one-eyed perspective. We have to look at all the factors that come into play. And then I think of it as a spider. When a spider is weaving a web, they're constantly, pulling on the strings to see how it all works out. Pulling on one string affects the structure of the entire web. That's how I look at farming. We have to constantly be looking at all the possible factors for it to thrive. So, regenerative.
Oh, good introductory remarks there. But I needed to ask you, before I come to Mr. Kidi, it sounds like there's a lot of learning that we have to do. Just listening to you, going to mashinani. When we talk about monoculture, when we talk about, deficiency because of maize maybe being the staple food, and we don't have rich nutrients. We always talk about national policy and, the nutritive value of it. I wanted just to ask you then, are you heavily involved in workshops, in creating awareness? What do you basically do with all this information? Where is the interface between you and the farmer?
So first off, I run a business that does that. And then I also work as a consultant with different organizations. And a lot of them are directly involved with farmers. And you've mentioned something about this information being, there's a lot to learn. On one hand, yes, but then this is how our grandparents were farming. This is new for us. But you sit down with your grandparents, this is how they used to do it. They knew what to do with the waste from the kitchen. They knew how to have the animals and the plants interact. Herbicides and pesticides just came through the other day. Before that, we were growing rich, healthy, nutritious food, and you'd rarely walk into a farm and find one crop. As much as there is a lot to learn, we also have had these sciences and technologies. We have them still in our genetics. We just need to.
Sounds like farming is really getting cool. Let me just get to Mr. Kidi right now. And yes, just to get your introductory remarks as well. Who is Mr. Kidi? How is your involvement also with the farming? Are you a farmer essentially, a food or a farm system designer?
Thank you, Debal. I am Kidi Mwaga from Kanu. I have had the privilege of serving as the secretary to the subcommittee on policy and legal affairs. And therefore, that means that I am directly responsible, part of the team that is directly responsible in reorienting the party's ideology to responding to the needs of the present. As we move into the 21st century, you realize that global politics, and of course by extension local politics, have had a paradigm shift. When you look at the Kanu of the 70s and 80s and 90s, we were talking about a political environment that was held hostage by the jostling between the East and West during the Cold War and the hangovers of the Cold War. Today, when we are in 2021 and we are having climate change, which is causing climate security or insecurity, we are seeing banditry in parts of this country, like now the recent case of in Laikipia. Then it means that governments must be in a position to be able to respond comprehensively to the challenges of the electorate. And therefore, that is why where I work in the Committee on Policy and Legal Affairs, and subsequently I've gotten myself being in this panel representing my party and the position of the government on some of these things. Yes.
Thank you very much. And of course, the subject that we're about to broach is effectiveness of government structures to affordably feed the rising population. And we can see the population in Kenya is rising exponentially. Just recently also the Minister of Agriculture was giving us the statistics that at least from 35 million Kenyans right now, we are growing exponentially towards 55.8 million people in this country. And if we don't have a robust strategy and policy put in place, we are facing a crisis. I wonder, from your own assessment as well, Jerry, if you look at the current population and the demographic dividends, especially the youthful bulge that we do have, and they're not really acclimatized or they don't have any leaning towards agriculture or food or agribusiness, what does it portend for us as a country?
Let's go back a little to education, yeah? When we'd be asked as children, what do you want to be when you grow up? The kid who says, I want to be a farmer, would be the laughing stock of the class. It begins there. But even starting there, there's definitely a lot that we need to be looking at and changing, because the education set around agriculture is also, again, think about the amount of time you spent studying about subsistence farming and cash crops. How much time, how many of the questions in your exams do you remember being about subsistence farming? A lot of it was about cash crops and all the data on them and all of that. So there's a lot. Agriculture now has so much focus on it being economic, so that again the phenomenon of the starving, malnourished farmer who's growing coffee, now bring it into the context of the youth. There's been a shift since COVID especially. I have personally a lot of friends who've gone into agriculture, who now have small gardens in their spaces. When COVID hit, I was living in Limuru. And so where we were was like this weird no man's land, where you had a barrier that made it so you couldn't come into Nairobi and one that made it so you couldn't go down into Nakuru. And so that middle spot also made it so I saw a lot of food trucks get turned around. You go to the market, there's barely any food. And I think that did the thing. You know, where people realized, oh, there's something, our food systems are broken. Now, I'm starting to see more youth involvement in agriculture.
Yes.
But then, let's not forget the conditioning that we had as we were growing up through our education. Soma kwa nguvu usikue mkulima. You know, just study hard so you don't become a farmer. It was a shame, it's not something you aspire to. But then you become an adult and something like COVID strikes and you realize, we need to eat. It's the most basic of our needs. A huge amount of why we are hustling in the first place is so that we can feed ourselves. So I'm beginning to see some shifts, but there's a lot of conditioning to undo. Even our farming methods are not the best. So even when young people are interested in stepping into the agricultural space, there's still, like you said earlier, there's still a lot of learning that needs to happen. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Kidi, let's come to you, and especially from the party level. Kanu, you've mentioned you've been in that particular space, legal affairs as well. But in light of what we're going through as a country with the declaration of drought, I wonder how then this also instigates a party like Kanu to reconfigure its manifesto towards, you know, food security in this country. Because we've been talking a good game about drought for a long time, malnutrition. We always know this is perennially with us. It's a vicious cycle. But how can we break from this, you know, cycle of drought with a very good policy that we've never seen from any other party? What will be different from this other party that Kanu can actually offer up its collective sleeves?
First, thank you, Debal. Kanu today believes that a government should be able to respond to the needs of its citizens. And one of the most pressing needs in any polity is one ability for the citizens to live in dignity. And there is a reorientation within Kanu that the next Kanu government must deliver a roadmap to Article 43 of the Constitution. The people of Kenya should be able to feed themselves, that our children should be able to not to die before the age of 5 because of malnutrition, that our adult population should be able to have a longer life expectancy because they are able to eat well. Kanu, as a government in waiting, has had time to introspect and appreciated the challenges that the citizens are going through. Today, as we get into 2022 general elections, one of the issues that we need to be talking about that we're not talking about, that of course is disrupting the food systems, is the climate change. With climate change, there is the entire disruption of what you call rain-fed agriculture.
Yes.
And with the disruption of rain-fed agriculture, attempts have been made to go into irrigation. Those efforts have not been sustained sufficiently, so that where the Kanu government comes in is that we have learned both from our own mistakes and the mistakes of subsequent governments. You remember when Kibaki government was coming to power, they told us, Kanu, that let them teach us how to create a food secure country in 10 years.
Yes.
We kept quiet. And in 10 years, you remember in 2011, in this country, we had citizens fundraising for fellow citizens who were unable to feed themselves.
The Kenya for Kenya initiative, yes.
Yeah, the Kenya for Kenya initiative. So right now, we fully appreciate we understand fully what needs to be done, and therefore, as a party, we are putting in the necessary infrastructure to make sure that we therefore have an end-to-end food systems, from food production to post-harvest practices that ensure that losses are minimized to the subsequent value chain. So that, you add to what the president is already doing by opening up the infrastructure. So that therefore, even when the value addition is done, and therefore that value, that product can then be shipped to the market, both locally and internationally. Yes.
Right, thank you. And you mentioned also the climate change challenge that we do have, and it's upon us, yes. But I'm inclined to wonder also from your end, how then does the climate smart farming really come into play? Because also it seems we as a country, we actually slow on the uptick when it comes to technology. Yes, we have the apps still, but we can see going to mashinani, not everyone has a smartphone. We still have kabambes and all. And I wonder how will the uptick then of climate smart farming take shape very quickly within the counties, especially maybe with the young guys?
I think first off, we need to recognize that the tech, the smartphones and all of that, they come to enhance something that already exists. We do not have a strong base yet for them to come enhance. So again, I'll almost always go back to education and learning. I'd like to change the term that we're using just a little from food security to food sovereignty.
Food sovereignty?
Yes.
Oh, it's a new one.
Food sovereignty, you have the people who are producing the food are the people who are determining policy, who are determining distribution, who are determining, you know, because what we have right now is, we all know this, Kenya is very pretty on paper.
Yes.
Very, very pretty. But then go on the ground, we also know that that's a different situation.
Yes.
You know, it's, yeah. So we could sit and talk about policy as much as we want, and it does have a place. I don't disagree. Yet, who is involved? Are we actually engaging the farmers who are growing the food and having them actually be part of decision making, of determining how they grow their food, where they get their seeds from, which the seed one is a whole thing that I get really passionate about, because there's a lot happening around that, even in regards to policy. But are we actually engaging the people who are growing the food? And I'm not saying on paper, are we actually sitting down, calling the farmers together and saying, okay, we want to hear what's actually happening. You know, what challenges are you facing? This whole climate change thing, how is it actually affecting you? What you know, if it's water, the sources, the river that used to run down this land, it's drying up. So how's that affecting you? I mean, yes, we could say we are coming in with drip irrigation, but where is that water coming from? The one that we're irrigating with in a drip, where is it coming from? If we're not, and the thing is that, tried and tested, evidence-based, there are places in the world, these deserts, Israel, we know this one, you know, that have been transformed into thriving forests. So again, we have to, first of all, even before we get to the smart tech, we have to look at what is it the smart tech is coming in to support. If we're looking at, say, I like to give, my favorite example is a forest. You walk into a forest, you have ground cover, you have whatever's growing underground, you have several canopies, which makes it so you're losing, if we're looking at just water, we're losing, a forest is losing very little amounts of water. Now imagine growing food in a similar way, so that we're not just dependent on the rain, that's the waters that, you know, that's falling, the rainfall, we're also growing our own water in the soil, which is, now that affects our aquifers. That ensures there's more water actually in the ground. But then we're not talking about that. There's very little education about that that's happening in our systems. We're talking about monoculture and what's the other culture?
Horticulture.
No, horticulture and all these other cultures. But we're really, actually, I feel like our education needs to catch up, you know. So if we're thinking of that as a technology, one that, again, like I've said, you go back to the past, our grandparents knew this. They knew how to harness water in the soil, you know, so that we're not having to bring in all the pipes and nothing wrong with them in and of themselves. But there are ways, there are technologies that exist, that have existed for generations, that have been tried and tested and found to be true, found to work. But multinationals would rather have us monoculture, you know, because that means we're producing all these amounts, and then whose ear, you know, does...
Don't be careful, I know where you're headed.
You see it coming, eh?
Yeah.
Who's the government giving its ear? You know, for the most part, it's the multinationals.
Right. Yeah,
So-
I saw that was slow in coming, but yeah, I could see it coming. Yes, but let me just come to you,
Yes.
Kidi, and ask you, because you talk about, when we're talking about smart technology, we talk about unemployment. There is also a new avenue of carbon trading as well, right? How then do we educate the youthful population that, you know, beside just farming, there's so many cogs around that you can actually join up, you know, to the farming. You don't have to actually take your djembe, but you can use also the current technology. Carbon emission is thriving, is here with us. And the world also, of course, is looking at zero emissions. Carbon emissions by 2050. I don't know. Kenya, we are targeting, is it 2025? No, or 2035? I have no sorting idea. You can tell me. But how then do we try and join up unemployment with carbon trading as well? And I think also from our manifests or a manifestation, what do they call it?
Manifesto.
Manifesto, yes. It's just eluding me, sorry. From the manifest itself, we can try and be so broad to capture also the tech-savvy population. And I think this is the aspect. I wonder if Kanu is considering this.
Well, Dabal, one thing I must tell you is that today, one of those things that, in making sure that we feed our population as a government in waiting, we have, among other things, been able to have a standalone slot for climate change and food security represented in the NEC, which is the highest decision-making organ within the party. What that does is that it is a part of the ideological reorientation I was talking about, in placing the party in a position that it therefore able to respond to the needs of its citizens. Before we move to carbon financing, is that when we come to food systems, there is entire opportunities that have been left by young people who should have taken up these positions and therefore made our economies better. There is the food production itself. There is the storage of this food. There is the transportation of this food. There is the other layer, or that we call value addition, so that we have had industries concentrated in certain parts while leaving certain parts entirely fallow without industries at all. So what a Kanu government is going to do, and building on the success of President Uhuru Kenyatta. When I talk of success, I am talking about the infrastructure that the road network that the president has built, like the Mau Mau Road. You come to Kisumu, the D1 road that connects Kisumu to Kisii to Sirare. So that what this does is that it has opened up areas that were hitherto impenetrable. When these areas have been opened, we want to have a situation where we have industries delocalization. When that delocalization is done, is that therefore the farmer who has produced food in whichever part of this country does not, number one, have to worry about where he will have to take his products. We've had the problem of aflatoxin in this country, while at the same time talking about maize shortage. So that sometimes we have to import maize while we have maize locally produced by our farmers being taken to waste. Those are some of the gaps we want to seal before we go to these other high-sounding ideals. We want to go back to basics and to make sure that our young people are given real opportunities of making sure that as a country we are able to respond to our own challenges. Yes.
But do you think maybe even when you talk about our food reserves as well and the aflatoxin, that this sometimes is politically instigated? There's nuances of politics. The fact is not that the high level of aflatoxin is within this particular maize or the storage of the food reserves that we do have. So it is just an alarmist way for people to use that as a fig leaf for them to import maize.
There are instances when governments have worked for the people. And there are instances when governments have worked for their own interests. So the difference here is that as a party that has had privilege of being in power for 39, we were in power for 39 years. And we were able, remember that in 1963, part of the things that as a government we promised to deal with, one of them was hunger. Unfortunately, we didn't make so much headway because by the time we were leaving, there were still hunger in our country. And even subsequent government administrations have still not been able to deal with it.
Yes.
It speaks to the complexity of this matter. Sometimes this complexity stems from rushing to high-sounding ideals and forgetting the basics. That is why I am saying that the next KANU government is, among other things, going to make sure that it goes back to basics. In going back to basics, we make sure that when a government is in place, today one of the biggest things we are big on as a party, or some of the things we are big on as a party, is making sure that we strengthen Article 10 of the Constitution, national values and principles of governance.
Yes.
We move to Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity.
Yes.
And making sure that we strengthen the legislation, the primary legislation that breathes lives into Chapter 6. That is the Leadership and Integrity Act. When we have done that, then we can now be able to deliver a roadmap to Article 43, where we have the citizens of this country living in affordable houses, having health care that they can rely on, that our people are able to feed themselves.
Yes.
So that it is in going back to basics that we are going to cure all these things we are talking about. When a government officer, someone put in a place of responsibility,
Yes.
for instance, creates an artificial food shortage, and then subsequently imports this food, maize, sugar, and then they make a kill to the detriment of their own citizens. It is that level of responsibility that as a party we are prepared to deal with when we eventually come back to power in 2022, because 2022 is our year. Yes, thank you.
Hey, yeah, I'll submit an invoice for this because, yes, you're taking also opportunity on this podium to really advocate for KANU.
No, the party has done its homework, and it is raring to go.
All right.
Yes.
Right, an invoice is coming your way. Let's go back to Jerry. And we know the phenomenon of locusts in this country. And so much comedy has been made also from the Ministry of Agriculture on locusts as well. But people were saying we were missing an opportunity, right? We were missing an opportunity. An influx of all these locusts in the country, yet we've not really harvested anything. Yeah, this is a source of protein. When you're talking about staple food being maize only, that has no nutritive value, the cognitive development of our children is affected. Protein was all over the place. What were the young guys doing to harvest this protein processes? Yeah, value addition and create an integrated, robust supply chain from where they are to the places where there's their need, even if it's not for human consumption, right? For poultry, for animal feed.
I feel like I'll start my responses with this one.
Yes.
Goes back to education, because the cultural aspect of it, that we know what our sources of protein are. They are meat, they are, we are well trained in exactly what they are. So, and that also goes to
So was
show.
it flawed? The training, was it flawed or it was limited? So
Limited. Limited, partly flawed, but when I think of education, it's a whole other one that would we would need another panel. But even
from my own understanding, and I think I always premise my thoughts on when you talk about the education.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just gives you the basic. I think all other aspects on the long continuum of it is up to you. Yeah?
I agree.
So as long as they teach you how to read and learn, that's it. Yeah, so take the initiative yourself to educate yourself, to take yourself to, institutions that you think will broaden your understanding in particular sphere of the undertaking that you are trying to pursue.
Well, if the education you acquire comes a lot through caning and actual, again, you look at the psychology of it. That Pavlov, You know, you teach the animal enough times electric shock, they know, you know, if I do this, I'll be shocked. If I do this other thing, I'll get food. Same thing, they get to a point and they stop looking for creative ways to feed themselves. Very similar thing happens. Now, does that apply to the entire population? No. There are people who still go through these systems and come out innovators and come out still curious, come out still asking questions. If it were the case for majority of us, we'd be having a very different conversation. So while I'm not trying to lift blame, I don't even think assigning blame here helps the situation in any way. I also see that some of the issues we're dealing with right now are due to the kind of conditioning that happens as, you know, as we're growing up through our education. And as I want to pause on that and respond to something he said.
Yes, please.
Back to basics.
Yes.
One of the basic, the very first, the baseline of the work that I do, regenerative agriculture, is based on one very simple idea. The shorter the distance from farm to plate, the higher the quality of the food and the more efficient the food system. If we can work our food systems around that premise, I mean, infrastructure, yes, the roads are getting better, pole pole. But then if part of what's happening, and this is a real case I'm about to describe, some European country shows up, you know, talks to farmers, cooperatives, and they're like, okay, here, we're going to give you free seeds. We're going to give you all the farm inputs you need, the fertilizers, the pesticides, the herbicides, everything. Grow that, will come through when it's harvest time, and then we'll buy the stuff from you. So now, back in that country, they banned the pesticides. So now the farmer grew the food. They knew someone was coming through to buy, right? But then now when it come harvest time, because these chemicals have been banned by, you know, in the country where the buyer came from, they now have all of this food that, yes, the roads are there. We can fly this food wherever we want to. But then that happened as well. So now they have nowhere to take their food. So as much as, yes, we're looking at the physical infrastructure and, you know, how all of that is happening, I also like to say it's a complex situation that we actually do need to simplify the solutions for. It's really the only way we are going to move forward. So yes, we could have the infrastructure, but then if we have all these other games happening, you know, if you have our trade agreements looking like they're about to look like, then we are going to have all the infrastructure we want working really well, but then because the context within which this infrastructure exists is not geared towards thrive, then we're still going to have issues such as the one I just described. We have, for instance, another example, there's been issues around watermelons. So we have some tastier watermelons, tastier and cheaper coming from Uganda. So you have the women at the market who are selling watermelons grown in Kenya, struggling to sell them because the ones that are coming through are tastier, look better, and are cheaper. So yes, the road from there to here is good enough to make it so they can come through. You know, the infrastructure is working well. So there's, like you said, and I agree with that, there's so many factors to look at. And while we can have a very simple center, the structure around that is still, we still have a lot of undoing to do.
Right, but
let me respond to something that my sister has raised. You know, the way she speaks eloquently, someone almost gets the impression that she is opposed to the opening up of the road network, which I think there is also a lot of politics around it, and I need to respond to it. One, governance is not entirely a simplistic thing. It is fairly complex. And therefore, I have talked about infrastructure around ensuring that our people are food secure. That infrastructure is not limited to, let's say, road network. That infrastructure begins from food production. It goes to post-harvest practices. It goes to value addition. So the value chain. When you talk about all these things, part of the things you will be relying on are the road networks. Secondly, we must also appreciate that we are increasingly living in a world that is also becoming borderless day by day. As we are living in an increasingly borderless world, we must therefore prepare ourselves, not for the challenges of the past, because it is always convenient to fall back to the solutions that have worked in the past, to find security in the things that we did in the past and got successes. We must also learn to reposition ourselves for the challenges of here and now. That is why I said that there are certain levels of responsibilities that a Kanu government would not tolerate. For instance, a multinational coming in and therefore jeopardizing the entire food security of an area, the environmental issues that with it, coming with it, and therefore the government sitting idly and doing nothing. That is something that, of course, needs to be condemned, and a responsible government would ensure that it works in the interest of its people. But we must, let's say this about multinationals.
Yes.
We must also appreciate the role that multinationals and external investors
Yes.
have done in opening up certain things. Today, one of the things, I'm giving this as an example.
Yes.
We know what PEPFAR did in fight against HIV/AIDS. And today we have adults, people in their 20s and early 30s, who are able to have a shot in life because of initiatives like that one.
Yes.
So that initiatives, either by local investors or international investors that jeopardize the security and the health of our people, needs to be punished by the government of the day, irregardless. But then singling out a multinational, which may have been a particular case, in my estimation, may not be very fair to multinationals, especially because they may not have
A right of reply?
Right of reply, yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's come to you, Jerry, as well, because you've broached that particular subject, especially of seeds. You were saying, yeah, well, let's not really go there. We know what really happens with seeds as well. But there is a Seed and Plant Varieties Act 2012. And the government, once again, people are saying it's failing to protect farmers from capitalists' exploitation. Part 1 of the act defines selling as including barter, exchange and offering, or exposing for a product for sale, taking away farmers' right to sell, share and exchange seed. I read that is recognized in the Constitution. Part 2, Section 3 of the Act prohibits the sale of uncertified seed. That is, we know the good old practice of selling and sharing seeds. And it is further being criminalized in Section 7, Subsection 5, which requires only seed appearing in Variety Index or the National Variety List to be sold. So if you're not listed, right, you have no market at the end of the day. And I'm just thinking, to a farmer where it's not really a large-scale farming, we were largely talking about subsistence farming with the fragmentation of land that we have in this country. Where does such legislation lead this country to, especially to the small-scale farmers? I wanted to take it to the government because this is
Thank you for bringing it here first. I think it creates a very interesting situation, a very sticky one,
Yes.
because we are prioritizing the breeder's rights over the farmer's rights. So what we like to call the peasant seeds, the ones that have actually interacted with the elements of the location from which they rise long enough over generations to actually have resilience, to have adapted to the environment within which they are harvested. So now we are saying to that small-scale farmer, and also let's appreciate that about 80% of the land owned in Kenya is owned by smallholder farmers. That's a huge percentage. So if we're telling these farmers that those seeds that have been used over generations, that have fed you, that are way more resilient, and I'll give you a good example. So let's work with maize, hybrid maize seeds. So you're assured the first harvest is going to be good. But then the one right after that, it goes back to its parent expression. So you're going to have the large cobs, the small cobs, the da-da-da. This is we're looking at if you replant the harvest. I just recently did a trip to Kisumu, Kitale, like especially Trans Nzoia, the maize area, and had time to sit with seed savers, people who primarily are working with maize seeds, and just get a sense of what's happening around this seed. And there's one particular one that kept coming up in all these different towns. It's called Namba Nane. And it's called Namba Nane because there's only 8 lines on the cob. It's a big seed, and it's a really resilient one. But then we are prioritizing the one that has gone through this certification that is different from the kind of certification because we've had the sciences and the technologies,
yes.
you know, but then we are prioritizing the what we'd rather call the more modern ones, you know, because it's easier. Like I said, they prioritize the breeder's rights. So we'll have someone coming through with these new seeds or, you know, this newly bred seeds that have only give you one good harvest. Then after that, what happens? You have to go back to the agrovet. So it's a power game. If you hold the seed, if every time you want to plant, you have to come buy the seed from me, then there's a power game at play here. But if you have the ability, the kind of seed you have, makes it so when you harvest, you put it away. When it come planting time, you have seeds from your last harvest, and so on and so forth. You can take care of yourself, you can feed yourself, your family, your people, and have a surplus. But if you have to come to me every time you need to grow food, come on.
You have to certify my seed.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it becomes your seed. Yeah?
Debal, in a statutory interpretation, because now you are reading a statute,
Yes.
that statute must be interpreted. In statutory interpretation, one of the rules of interpretation is what we call the mischiefs rule. In the mischiefs rule is that you're looking at what mischief this piece of legislation was seeking to cure. Today, with the AGOA market open to us,
Yes.
with the EU market open to us, and of course looking at our free trade area, African free trade area,
Yes.
is that therefore we must have food that is able to go into these markets without being rejected.
So the need for certification.
So that is the need for certification. So that the fact that maybe the framers of the statute did not take time to maybe think about those who are producing for subsistence production.
Yes.
But I think if a reading of that statute was looking at opening up, being able to access all these trade agreements that are open to our farmers. I know of our farmers who are utilizing the AGOA market, and you see, for instance, you can't access the AGOA market if your produce does not meet certain threshold. And I don't think that we should leave these markets to other people, because if we don't seize this, I want to give a case in point of one of the fastest growing economies today, China. How did China become the large powerhouse it is today? Is that China was able to produce and to manufacture and ship, get to the world market, especially when they got into the WHO membership in 2001 through the help of the US. And therefore, when they got into the WHO market, therefore they've been able to become
WHO or WTO?
I mean WTO, sorry,
Yes, yes.
WTO market in 2001.
Yes.
So that to imagine that our only production should be subsistence is another fallacy that we need to debunk. Because I don't have to, like she said rightly at some point,
Yes.
that you don't have to farm to feed yourself. You could move to a different area or specialization within this entire food systems and still be able to feed yourself. So that when we look at that act, I don't think we need to demonize it, but look at the benefit it was seeking to unleash to our farmers.
So Njeri, she's seeing the demon in the act?
I will take that. I am actually. And the thing is, someone needs to.
Someone needs to.
Someone needs to.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
And just to add on to, or to respond to what you said, I see the importance of certifying for the international markets.
Okay, yes, very good.
At the same time, we have had ways to certify that we are now demonizing. So how do we make it so our policies are inclusive? You know, I'm not saying let's not go out into the international markets. Let's do that. However, and back to the principles of the kind of agriculture I tend towards, how about if we trade the surplus? If we are able to get ourselves to a place where we don't have the president coming through for the nth time saying, oh, by the way, guys, people are dying over there of hunger. We are, a huge part of how we create income in Kenya is agriculture. So if we're talking about selling surplus, now that's a model that makes sense to me. But if we're selling into the international market, on one hand, this hand is selling, and this other one is having to bring...
actually asking for food aid.
Exactly. Yes. What that is totally absurd, and yet that's our reality. So how do we make it so even a policy like that, so yes, let's certify for the international markets, fine, have no problem with that. But then we have also had certification methods that have worked, and you said something about looking to the past for solutions. I don't know that there's any other way to do it but that. Because if it has been tried, tested, and found to be true, then we build upon it. We can't then say, oh, that worked, but we're pushing it to the side because let's try this. We, at the very least, need to hold on to what has worked and then build upon it, So if we've had our own seed certification methods that have worked, let's work with those and then now bring on these new ones because we are constantly evolving. I appreciate that. Let's bring this in addition to what we have found to work here. Let's find ways to form policies and laws and regulations around our own methods that have worked. But now what seems to be happening is that they're coming in to replace our methods. And that's where my demon rears its head. That's why I see it rear its head.
Yeah, and the demons will rear their heads because she's not been involved in processing this legislation. Yeah, where is her input? And who are actually the people who, that participatory mechanism, how is the small-scale farmer involved that they are in agreement that, yes, this one is not going to be punitive to us as we're winding up as well?
Debal, one thing is that when I talk about looking for the past for solutions, is that, for instance, if you look at things like food security and food systems, initially, when we're talking about these things, we were looking at household level in isolation, so that you have to be a farmer and farm and be able to farm and produce food for your own family, for your own children. Yes. Today, as I've said before, that we are living in an increasingly borderless world. We are therefore must not rely on the solutions that will only get towards feeding your specific household in isolation. Yes. But we must put ourselves in a scenario where we are able to take charge of the supply system across the supply chain across the globe or within the continent, so that we are able to also get into some of these trade deals, so that we are able to lift our people out of poverty. So that I wasn't saying that to demonize the solutions we've relied on in the past. As someone, because this debate appears that now I hold a brief for the government, let me make certain additions.
A government in waiting.
Of course, so let me speak about this government and other governments that have been there, other administrations. Is that you realize that in 2013, with so much pomp, we went into Galana Kulalu and said that we were going to, revolutionize that part of the world agriculturally. Truth is that Galana Kulalu did not yield so much as it was tweeted that it would. So that in the government taking the initiative, you give it an A for try. In terms of actual delivery, you give it to be when you are being generous. So that what we are saying is that subsequently government actions, especially where there is taxpayer money, is when we make legislations, is that we must be able to have a clear picture of an end-to-end engagement. That when we get into this program, let's say Galana Kulalu, what precisely are we seeking to achieve? So that sometimes government programs are overtaken by selfish interest within the corridors And therefore, we end up with a brilliant idea ending up as a white elephant and putting the livelihoods of the citizens of this country in jeopardy.
Yes.
That is something that must end. At least it is ending. When we get in, we are going to make sure that it ends. Thank you.
When you get in. Wow, fantastic. All right.
I said when, not if.
When. We are winding up. I just want to give each of you 30 seconds also to just give us your headline thoughts. But a sobering figure that we have in the global index, global hunger index, that puts Kenya at 87, right, against 117. And we are classified as serious. What should we do with this information?
I like what you just said about end to end. It comes back to who are we listening to? What are really the interests of the government? How much information does Mwananchi have? How does this information make it to them? How do we build the structures around this information to make it so it's actually implementable? Again, Kenya is pretty on paper. But then implementation, so...
These are different kettle of fish.
So whole other, whole other chaotic space. But there are solutions, they exist.
Yes.
They're working in different places in the world. They worked in the past. How do we merge what has worked in the past? What could work? What is working within our context? And then build the structures, and systems around that to make sure it thrives. Policy comes in. Involvement, youth, everyone needs to be in on this. How do we make it so everyone's in on this? Education, making the tools available that are necessary for it. And that thing I said, that ni mwa Kenya, the shorter the distance between the farm and the plate,
the better.
The better the quality of the food and the more efficient our food system is. Look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kili?
I think that going forward, I think one of those things we need to really emphasize on is building synergies. Building synergies from the policymakers levels, building synergy with the farmers, building synergy with all other players. So that when there is synergy, when every moving part is working in tandem with another moving part,
Yes.
is that therefore there is no disconnect. So that when we say that we have, let's say, arid and semi-arid areas, we say that what is their potential, what can they produce? The lack of rain notwithstanding, the diminishing pasture notwithstanding. Then we go to areas that are not arid. We go to the Trans Nzoias of this world where we have rain-fed agriculture. And therefore, when we build this synergy, then we shall be able to respond comprehensively to the question of food security and establishing sustainable food systems for the rising population.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kidimwaga, Secretary Policy and Legal Affairs, Kanu. Also, I want to thank you, Kanyu Njeri, Regenerative Farm and Food System Designer. I think that has been a very, very interesting, immersive discussion. I've learned a lot, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, rich stream of information from here. So I want to thank you so very much and continue, steamrolling this conversation and make sure that, yes, Kenya, if you can, will come into power, right? We'll still remain to be a very...
Say we're not...
Okay, that we'll see in 2022. Thank you very much for graciously consenting to be part of this conversation. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very much for your valued company as well. You've been watching Siasa Bomba. Keep the conversation online. #Siasa Bomba. See you.